this tutorial you will learn how to create realistic wings using Blender 4.3, and the good thing is we're going to do this in a very procedural way. This means that by the end of the video we will have a system that allows us to create any kind of wing that we can imagine. So let's get started. For this tutorial I actually pre-created this startup file, which contains of a couple of feathers that we're going to use inside of our geometry nodes. You can find this in the link in the description, download that, and then we can get started. So of course the first thing that we're going to do is create a new geometry nodes for the cube, which we call wing or something like that. And of course we don't need the actual cube, so we're going to remove the group input for now. And before we're going to add in anything else, I first want to have a look at what does a wing actually look like, especially what does the anatomy of a wing actually look like, because it will help us a lot in creating a wing in Blender. So let's see, it looks like this. What we see over here is the bone structure of a wing, and we see that it basically consists of 3 parts. So this helps us because basically what we want to create first is this bone structure, and we're going to do that with 4 curves. So this is going to be a curve, this is going to be a curve, and this is going to be a curve. So let's start with this one. So if we do a curve line node and connect it like so, then we have our first bone. But we want to rotate this, of course. So let's do a transform geometry nodes so that we can rotate it over the y-axis. So let's rotate this over the y-axis by kind of like this. So now what we want is we want to instance another curve line on the end part of this curve line so that we're creating this part. And in order to do that, we are of course going to do an instance on points node. And as the instance, we can do another curve line like so. But now you see it's instanced on both the end and the start of the original curve. We don't want that. So if we do an endpoint selection node for which we disable the start side and connect it with the selection, now we only have it on the end part of that curve. And now, of course, to make it that we can see both of the curves, we can do a join geometry nodes and connect that like so and like so and like so. And now we can rotate this instance node like this. And of course, you can also change the length, of course, like so, but that's not important for now. So what we want to do now is we want to instance another curve on this end part. However, before we do that, we have to do something else because this curve is now still an instance and not an actual object. So what we need to do is a realize instances node, and then we can instance in a good way another curve on this end part. So if we do an instance on points node again, connect it like so, and do another curve line like this, and connect the endpoint selection also over here, then we can join it like so, and then we see we have it like this. This one we can also rotate kind of like so, and then you see we already have kind of the anatomy of a wing. However, if I rotate this part, for example, we see that the other parts are not really reacting to that. But we want that. We want that all the rotations are connected with each other so that it goes in a procedural way. So what we want to do for that is we first of all want to have control over the separate XYZ axis over here. So if we do a combine XYZ node, then we have that. And we also want to do that for the other instances nodes. So like this. And now let's do a value node. And this value node is going to be the actual controller of the wing opening up and closing. So this one we want to connect with the y-axis, and then you will see, okay, it can rotate, which is perfect. And then let's connect it also with the y-axis of this one. However, then you will see it's always stretched, right? So we want to do something different. The first thing that we want to do in order to make this right is reversing the rotation. And we can do that with a math node, which we set on multiply, and multiply this by -1 so that it goes like so. But we want this to go over there to the other side. So let's add some value to it. So let's do another math node, which we set on add, and let's add pi to this. And now you will see that works perfectly fine. We want to do the exact same thing for this part. So let's actually take these nodes over here, connect them like so and like so. And then you will see that works perfectly fine. And we have a bone structure that opens up and closes again. Oh, and by the way, we also want to realize this last curve, of course. So let's do a realize instances node right over there. So at the moment, our bone structure looks like this. But what if we want to make it a bit smoother so that it goes a bit more like so, like a real wing, for example. Well, actually, there's a cool trick to make this look smoother. So what we want to do is a set spline type node. And at the moment it's on poly, but we want to set this on NURBS. So if you do that like this, they see nothing is happening. The reason why nothing is happening is because these curves are not connected with each other. Although it looks like they are connected, they are not, because they are still instanced on top of each other. And to make them connected with each other, we want to do a merge by distance node. However, you will see that the merge by distance doesn't work because that node only works for meshes and not for curves. So in order to make this work, we can actually do a little trick. So if we first convert it to a mesh by doing a curve to mesh node, and then afterwards we do a mesh to curves node again, then it works and it is connected. And then you see we also have a very smooth curve. If you want to have control over how smooth it is, then you can do a resample curve node, and then you will see if you set the count lower, it will be smoother, and if you set it higher, it will be less smoother. So if you set this on 9, that should be quite fine, and you will see that it still works. So if we go over here into our value node, see, yeah, that looks quite good. Okay, that's it for the anatomy parts. Let's put a box around that. So let's select it all. Let's press Ctrl J. And then if you press F2, we can name this anatomy or something like that. And then let's move on to the next part. However, I do need your attention because this might be a very important thing that I'm going to say. Because I can completely understand if you are looking at these nodes and you are thinking, oh my god, what is all of this? How am I ever going to learn all these nodes? I wish there was some place in which I can just learn every single node in geometry nodes in a very easy and chill way. Well, then I have good news for you because I released the Big Notebook. It's a book that explains every single node in geometry nodes over the course of more than 200 pages, and it starts from the very basics and slowly progresses towards more advanced techniques. The book is available on my Gumroad and it has been fully upgraded to Blender 4.3, so every new node has been added in. And also, if you use the code WING, you will get 30% off of your purchase. This discount code is valid until the 10th of February, so be sure to get your copy of the Big Notebook today. And with that being said, let's continue the tutorial. The next part is going to be creating feathers that are going kind of like this over the entire curve. And these feathers, they mostly come like in 3 different layers, right? So we're going to have a small layer, and we're going to have a middle layer, and we're going to have a big layer. But to make it ourselves easy, we're going to first create the big layer, and then we're going to look at those other layers. So for the biggest layer, what we want to do is we want to instance these feathers on the curve. So if we do an instance on points node, and the object that we want to instance is in our case first going to be this low poly model of the feather. Later we can do it with the high poly model, but just for the sake so that my computer is not going to lag a little bit, we are first going to do it with the low poly one and then the high poly one. So to get this one into geometry nodes, let's do an object info node, and let's take this eyedropper over here and click on it. And then let's connect the geometry with the instance, and let's see what that looks like. That looks like this. Okay, first of all, if you want to have control over the number of feathers that you have over here, you can do a resample curve node, and then the count is literally the number of feathers, as you can see. Let's set this now on a count of 35 or something like that. Yeah, that's fine for now. So regarding the rotation of these feathers, what we want is, of course, that they are not going straight down. What we want is that these feathers are going in the line of the last curve, so like this, and these feathers should go straight down so that it goes kind of like this. So to do this, what we want is that the rotation is dependent on the tangent of the last curve. So let's do an align Euler to vector node, which we set over here. And the vector that we want to align these feathers to is going to be the curve tangent, like so. However, you see, okay, it goes reverse. So let's switch it up with a vector math node, which we set on scale and then scale it by -1. Then you will see it goes in the right direction. However, you see that this curve tangent node takes into account the tangent of each point of the curve, but we only want to have the tangent of that last curve over here. So let's remove this part. And in order to get the tangent of that last curve, we want to go over here in the anatomy. And we first want to store that tangent in that anatomy. So if we do a store named attribute node, which we set on vector, of course, and then also on spline, because we want to have the tangent of the spline. So if we do a curve tangent node, now we have the curve tangent of only that spline. So if we go back over here, we can do a named attribute node, which we set on 10 and then connect it like so. And then you will see that works. And now you see every feather goes in that direction. However, we want that over the course of the curve, the vector over here becomes lower so that these go more down. And in order to do that, we can just do a spline parameter node and we connect the vector with the vector. And then you see that works perfectly fine. And it also still works with the value node like this. Ooh, that already starts looking pretty cool. Okay, you will see that if we look at it like this, you see that each feather is perfectly on top of each other. However, we don't want that. We want that they are kind of rotated so that they go over each other in a good way. And to do that, we want to do a rotation node right over there. And we want to use the local axis of each feather. And then if you change the Z axis like so or like so, then you will see we can make them go over each other. So let's set this on a small value like 8 degrees or something like that, and then that should already be enough. If you don't really see the effect of what we're doing right now, you can go over here into the shading and turn on shadow so that you can actually see what we're doing. Oh, and also if you want to slightly randomize the rotation of the feathers a bit, you can do a random value node. And then if you do a combine XYZ node, we want to randomize the Y axis over here. So connect it like so and like so. And then let's make this a small value like minus 0.02 and this one 0.02 or something like that. And then let's also set the Z axis over here on 0.1, of course, so that it's rotated again. And yeah, that looks good to me. Only thing we need to do is change the scaling of this, because we want that over the course of the feathers become smaller. So we can do a spline parameter node again, and we connect the vector with the scaling. And then you see, okay, that's a bit too small over here. So let's do a map range node right over there. And then let's set this one on 0.8, for example. And let's set the 2 max on 1.6, for example. And then that looks perfectly fine to me. Of course, this still works perfectly fine, which is really, really cool. Oh, and I also figured that if you set this map range node on smoother steps, it looks a little bit better, because otherwise the scaling goes in a straight line from 0 to 1. But with smoother steps, it goes more like this to 0 to 1, which I think looks a bit cooler in our case. Okay, that's quite it for the biggest layer of feathers. Let's now move on to the middle layer and the smallest layer. And we're going to do that in a very easy way, because we basically already have that node setup right over here. So we're going to group these nodes by pressing Ctrl G. And then if we go out of it, we see we have a node group which creates these feathers. However, we want to have some control variables to change for the middle part and the smallest part. So if we go back into the node group, and then the first thing that we want to have control over is, of course, the object that is used inside of the certain node group. And then also we want to have control over the number of feathers, of course. So let's connect it like this. And another thing that would be handy to have control over is over here, the 2 min and 2 max of that map range node. So if we connect that like so and like so, and also we want to have separate control over these random value over here. So let's connect it like so and like this. And you know what? Let's also do the seed of the rotation, of course, so that we can randomize it even more. Okay, cool. Let's go out of this node group and let's see, let's do Shift D to duplicate it and let's connect it again like this. And now if you do Control Shift and right click and connect them like so, then it will automatically create a joint geometry, as you can see. And now the first thing that we want to do in this node group is we're going to change the feather type. So this one should have this feather. And now if we have a look, okay, we have to change some variables, of course. First of all, we want to change the scaling of the feathers. So let's set the 2 min value a little bit lower like so, something like that. And also the 2 max value, let's set that on 1.2 for example, so that it is like this. And I think that's a good scaling for the middle layer. Okay, next up, you will see that the feathers of the middle layer are very much intersecting with the feathers of the bigger layer. And we don't want that. So we need to have control over one more thing in our node group. So if we go into this node group, the thing we want to have control over is this X rotation over here. If we connect that over there, then we can go out of this again, and then we can say, okay, make this a small number like minus 0.02 or something like that. And then it goes over it, and that looks really good. Okay, let's do the same thing for the smallest layer. So let's take this node group, and if you do Ctrl-Shift-D, then it will duplicate it, but keep the connection, and we can connect it over here. This smallest layer is going to use the same feathers as the middle layer, but it should be smaller, of course. So let's set the toMin value on 0.4, and let's set the toMax value on 0.46 or something like that. However, we don't really see them. That's because we need to change the rotation part over here. So let's change this rotation to something small, like minus 0.05 or something like that. And let's also maybe set the count higher to like 50 or something like that. Let's check if it still works. If we go back to our value node, then you will see, yeah, that looks perfect. Looks like a perfect wing to me. So this is now basically done. So let's put a box around it. So let's take these nodes, Ctrl-J, and then let's press F2 to name this feathers. Okay, now we have this, and it already looks cool. However, you see over here, the top part, yeah, that doesn't really look that natural. And after doing some research, I figured that the best way to make this look good is to put a bunch of small feathers on top of this curve. So if we take a look over here, I have these 3 squares, and these 3 squares are basically just transparent images of feathers. And that's exactly what we're going to use for this part of the wing. So what we want to do is, for now, let's actually disconnect the actual feathers, and let's connect the spline again so that we have it like this, and let's make joints like so. And what we want to do is we first want to make a surface on which we are going to instance those small feathers that I had. And to be honest, I don't want to spend too much time on creating that surface. So what we're going to do is in curve to mesh node, and as the profile curve, we're going to do a curve line like so. However, we don't want this curve line to go into the Z-axis. We want this to go into the Y-axis. So let's set it on minus 0.5 and 0.5. However, the scaling is a bit too big. So we're going to change this with a set curve radius node. And this curve radius node should be bigger over here and smaller over here. So we're going to do a spline parameter node, which we set the vector into the radius. However, it's now reversed, of course. So let's do a map range node, which we also set on smoother steps because it looks better. And at the moment it goes from 0 to 1, but let's set this first on 1 to 0, and then let's set this one lower to like 0.2 or something like that. And then I think that looks pretty good. However, if we go into wireframe mode, we see that we do not really have that much geometry, right? We also want to have geometry that goes more over here so that we have more points to instance on. So in order to do that, we can just do a resample curve on the curve line over here. And then if we set the count a little bit higher on like 45 or something like that, then we have a lot of geometry, and we can actually do the same thing on the original curve. So let's do that over here. And let's set this on 100 or something like that, so that we have a lot of geometry on which we can do an instance on points node. And the thing we want to instance on the points you just saw is the small feather collection. So you can just drag that in over here and then do separate children and reset children. And then if you put the instance over here, then you will see we have a lot of stuff going on. Okay, to make it herself maybe a little bit more of an overview, let's set this value lower to like 10 and this value on 10 too, so that we can actually see what we are doing. Let's set it on 3 or something like that. Okay, first of all, the things should be smaller. So let's set them smaller like so. Let's also go back into solid view mode for now. For our purpose, let's actually do a join geometry nodes and connect the instance on points and the curve to mesh with that, so that we can see how this is looking. So obviously we want to change the rotation of our feathers, because now it looks like this. So first thing is that the rotation of the feathers should follow the tangent of the original curve. So what we're going to do is an align rotation to vector node, connect that over there, and we want to have the tangent of the curve. However, this is not a curve anymore, so we need to capture that tangent before this curve to mesh. So if we do a capture attribute node, and we also do a curve tangent node right over there, then we can connect it over here. And then you will see if you set it on Y, then you will see it follows the tangent of the curve, which is perfect. However, we also want that it follows the normal of the mesh so that the feathers are flat on the surface. So let's do another align rotation to vector node, but this time we can just do a normal node, which we connect like so, and then you see it's flat on it. Now we also of course want to add some randomization to this, so let's do a rotate rotation node, and let's set this on local. And then if you do a random value node, which we set on vector, then we can connect it over here. And let's make the vector minus 0.5 to 0.5 so that it's just a small random rotation and it's still following the curve. Okay, cool. Now we can set the resample curves node a little bit higher again. So let's set this one back to 100 and let's set this one on 45. And then you see that looks amazing. However, let's also make the scaling of the feathers smaller if they are further over here, of course. So we want to do that with a spline parameter node. However, we also need to capture that. So let's do a spline parameter right over there. And let's connect it with the scaling of the instance on points. However, we want to remap this, of course. So let's do a map range node and let's connect this one over there and then this one over there. And let's set the maximum value on 0.004, for example. And let's set the to min value on 0.25 or something like that. And then you see that looks quite cool. Okay, from here we can actually disconnect the original mesh and we can import our feathers again with the rest. And then you will see that looks quite good. Yeah. And it will still work, of course, with the actual value node. And then we have created quite a cool wing already. However, there's a few more things that we can do. First of all, what we can do is if the wing is like open all the way over here, that the feathers go more like this, right? Like more open or something like that. So in order to do that, we're going to make use of matrix nodes. What we want to do is a set position node together with a position node, because we want to change the position of each point of the feathers. And then if we do a transform point node, we can apply matrix transformations to this. And the node that we're going to use for this is going to be very simple, a combine transform node. Connect that over here. And now you will see if you move it, then you see, yeah, this is not really what we would expect it to do. What we would expect it to do is that when we rotate this over the y-axis, that the entire thing just as a whole rotates over the y-axis and not in the way that it's doing now. The reason why it's doing this is because these are all still instances and not real objects. So if we do a realize instances node right over there, then you will see it is actually rotating it as an entire thing. And now what we want is that this y rotation is dependent on the x position of each point of the wing. And if you remember correctly, we kind of did the same thing in my flower tutorial. So if you have seen that video, you will kind of know already what we are going to do. So the thing that we want to do is a position node, so that we have the position of each point. And we want to do a separate XYZ node, so that we have control over the separate x-axis. And now if we do a combine XYZ node, we can connect the x-axis with the y-axis. In order to make this go in a good way, we want to do a map range node. And let's set this on smooth steps. And at the moment, this map range node goes from 0 to something like 1 over here or something like that. But we want to have this range over here. So what we can do is let's set the to max value a little bit higher so that we can see clearly what part is going to be affected. So let's say we want to have it from this part, kind of over here, from this to a smaller part. So if we set this on something like so, then you see that's good. And now if we set this on back on 1 again, then you will see we can create quite a cool wing effect. Cool. And especially if you now close the wing, you will see it works perfectly fine. And that looks really cool, I think. Okay, let's actually put a box around all of these things. So let's take this one, Ctrl J. And let's do F2 and let's name this bending or something like that. And let's also do it over here. Let's do Ctrl J F2, and let's make this small feathers or something like that. And let's put it like so. Okay, the final thing that I want to do with this wing is show you how to mirror it in a very easy way. So of course we could do a mirror modifier, but that's not fun. So we're going to use geometry nodes for this. If you do a transform geometry nodes and you connect that over here and then like this. Now if you change the scaling of the x-axis to -1, then you will see you have a mirrored version. So if you now do Ctrl Shift and right click to join these together, you have mirrored wings. However, if you want to have some distance between them, then you can do Shift right click to join this together. And let's do another transform geometry nodes and make some distance just like this. Okay, cool. We have working wings in Blender, which is perfect. It still works perfectly fine, as you can see. Oh yeah, and by the way, if you want to make this go up and down like so, easiest way to do that, I would say, is just do a simple deform modifier set to bend and then also set it on the z-axis so that you can make it flap like so or something like that. And this way you can also animate it like this, of course. But for now, I will turn this off. Of course, we are now still using our low poly feathers, but let's see what it looks like with the high poly feathers. So for this node group, we are going to use, of course, this feather. And then for the other two node groups, we're going to use the other feather. So let's do that like this. And then you will see the feathers look quite cool, to be honest. Of course, we can still change a lot of variables to see what looks the best, of course. I think a lower count on the middle layer of the feathers looks a little bit better. But let's see. Yeah, that looks quite cool. Oh, and by the way, one more thing. If you are in render view mode and in cycles and you see that all these small feathers over here are all turning black. Well, the problem that we have over here is that there are so many layers of transparency that our light has difficulties traveling through that mass of transparency. And to fix this easily, you can go over here into render properties and then under light path, the transparency over here, you can set that on like 150 or something like that. And then you will see that works perfectly fine. If your computer cannot really handle this transparency of 150, then I recommend to just lower the resolutions of these two resample curve nodes. So I very quickly got over all the variables that we've created in our geometry nodes and tweaked them a little bit to make the wings look a little bit better. Let me show you what variables I changed. So first of all, over here, this value node is now like this. And then the curved lines for the anatomies are now as follows. So this one has a length of 0.5 and this one has a length of 1.25. So it's a little bit longer and this one stayed the same. However, for this one, I did change the add node value so that there's more of a sharper angle over here, and which looks a little bit better, I think. And then over here in the resample curve node, I changed the count to 7 so that the arm looks a little bit smoother. And then over here in the node groups, I changed the counts to 30 and to 15 and also to 20. And then if we go over here in the settings for the small feathers, I changed the to min value over here to 0.05. And in the map range node over here, I changed it to these values so that the feathers are a little bit smaller. And then lastly, in the bending part over here, I changed the map range to these values to make it look a little bit better. But of course, it's not important to me that you have the exact same values as I have, because with this system, you can create an unlimited amount of wings, whatever you like. And that already brings us to the end of this tutorial. I hope you liked this video again. And if you did, please give this video a thumbs up, comment down below if you have any questions. And if you don't want to miss out on any future videos, I recommend subscribing to the channel. And also be sure to check out the big notebook by going into the link in the description to get 30% off your purchase. And with that being said, thank you for watching and I see you in the next one.